Honourable Member for Newton North Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising in support of Bill C-26, an act to amend the Criminal Code, the Canada Evidence Act, and the Sex Offender Information Registration Act to enact the High-Risk Child Sex Offender Database Act and to make consequential amendments to other acts. I'm standing here in support at second reading because I think we all agree in this House, it doesn't matter whether you sit on that side of the House or this side of the House, that protection of our children should be and needs to be one of our top priorities. And when we're looking at many things we do in this Parliament, and we do a huge range of things in this Parliament, Mr. Speaker, I don't take anything as seriously as I take the protection of children. Now, being a mother, grandmother, and a teacher for quite a few decades, and having worked with hundreds and thousands of children, I realize the importance of child protection. And on a very personal level, and I'm sure every member of Parliament would agree, there is nothing more abhorrent or feels as sickly as when we think of sexual assault on our children. And even if you've not had children of your own, Mr. Speaker, this kind of criminal activity is abhorrent and just absolutely heinous to each and every one of us. And it's in that line that I want to say that I am pleased, as my esteemed colleague from Winnipeg said earlier, at the tone of the debate in this room today, because I think we want to get this right. I not only think that, Mr. Speaker, I want to get it right, and I want each and every one of us to do whatever it takes to make sure we do this in such a way that it actually protects our children. And in order to do that, I am going to plead with my colleagues in government from across the way. This is one bill. Let us not try to cut off debate. Let us not try to cut off debate, which we have seen many, many times. This is too important an issue to be rushed through. The government could have brought this forward a long time ago, but it's here right now. But now that it is here, let us take and do our job and make sure that we do everything we can to protect the children that this bill purports to. Secondly, when this bill goes to committee, once again, this is more than a request. As a Member of Parliament, I am absolutely pleading with my colleagues from across the way. Let us make sure that at committee we take the time to bring witnesses in, and not just a couple of witnesses each, or what I experienced last week on a piece of legislation I was dealing with, one witness allowed to the official opposition, and then only 5 minutes of questioning of that witness. Because I actually believe everybody is genuine. I want to believe that when we are tackling something as serious as child protection, and specifically when we're talking about sexual harassment, sexual assault on children. And with that in mind, it is really critical that when we go to committee stage, that we not only take the time to hear the expert witnesses, and let's make decisions that will actually make things better. You know, Mr. Speaker, all of us are members of Parliament, and we all love photo ops, right? We have them in our ridings all the time when we are making announcements, or when, you know, like a festival occurs, or as I'm going to be going in Surrey to the tree lighting ceremony. Those are kind of photo ops we should see. But when it comes to sexual assault protection of our children, this is not where we just want to be rushing things through just so we can say we're doing something. So I am not on the Justice Committee, but I have a great deal of trust in our critic and other members of the Justice Committee to be able to do due diligence. But in order to be able to do that, they actually need time. They need the time to have discussions with the witnesses, then they need time to deliberate, and I would say then they need time to put forward thoughtful amendments. And I'm hoping that this is one of the legislations where my colleagues across the other way will not be into my way or the highway. What we will actually get is a serious consideration of the amendments we put forward, and I'm sure there will be many, because my colleague, who is the critic for that area, is a very experienced lawyer who actually has a lot of expertise in this area, and she will and is taking this file very, very seriously, and I know that she will have some great suggestions. So once again, let us make sure that as we tackle a very, very difficult, very, very sensitive, very heart-wrenching issue of protection of our children from sexual offenders, that we do this right, we get it right, so that our children are truly protected. And because that's what all our goal is. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I have 3 beautiful grandchildren. And of course, like every other grandmother or grandfather out there, I'm going to say that they are the most gorgeous grandchildren on this planet. And I think grandparents actually get the right to say that over and over again. And I watch their lives compared to the way my children grew up. The kind of access they have on the internet. Now, my daughter is one of those moms who's got all these kind of filters put in, checks and balances, checking into where the kids are on the internet. But not every parent is able to do that. And not every parent has the knowledge to be able to do that all the time. But once again, as I was saying, Mr. Speaker, our children are exposed to so much more. And no matter how much monitoring a parent does of their child's use of the internet and their activity on the internet, we know that there are opportunities for those who seek to assault our children, to use the internet in a way that probably shocks and surprises even many of us in this room who are a little bit more literate in these areas, but not in that way. And I'm sometimes shocked, Mr. Speaker, like at sometimes what pops up when you're on the internet. So there is a lot we need to be doing to protect our children, but it is a different world. And I'm always worried about my grandchildren and other children and what are they being faced with, confronted with. If they're having a sad moment and they write something on the on Facebook or any of the other social media, what kind of predators are waiting out there to pounce? And we've, of course, heard about all the bullying that goes on the internet and the dire consequences of that. But, Mr. Speaker, getting back to this particular piece of legislation, let me make it very, very clear, and I think that there is no doubt about this, that the NDP, every single member sitting in this caucus, has zero tolerance policy on matters involving sexual offences against children. Look, we respect the principles of jurisprudence and fundamental laws. Absolutely. At the same time, zero tolerance policy when it comes to sexual offences against children. In the past, Mr. Speaker, and I don't want to keep bringing this up, but sometimes we just have to remind ourselves. It's the NDP. It was the NDP that offered to fast-track the parts of the former Bill C-10 that dealt with sexual offences against children. We were in agreement on that particular component, and we were willing to separate that and have it go through, but of course to no avail. NDP members have also introduced private members' initiatives that the government ultimately adopted with a view to preventing the sexual exploitation of children and making it illegal to use a computer to organize an offense against a child. That, of course, Mr. Speaker, was long before my time, and it was a former NDP member, Dawn Black, who is now retired and enjoying political life in a different arena. And so, you know, as I sort of said, we are all here, and I believe our goal is to protect our children. And we also know, Mr. Speaker, that in order to have child protection, having legislation itself is not enough. We can pass all the legislation we like, but unless our communities have the resources they need, that legislation is just words on paper. I come from the city of Surrey, and as many of you heard, we have had some pretty tragic events, you know, murders in our city. And my city of Surrey is still waiting for a commitment that was made for additional policing. And that commitment was made by the federal government that they have not lived up to. So one of my major concerns, once again, Mr. Speaker, is I'm from a municipality that is really stretched when it comes to policing. It is really stretched, not only through increase in petty crimes, through mental health and drug-related crimes, but also dealing with gangs, dealing with drug cartels, and all of those things. And I worry that sometimes we as parliamentarians pass legislation because we absolutely believe in it and we think it's good, but then we undermine our own legislation when we don't provide the resources that are needed by communities. And that is one thing, Mr. Speaker, that I'm hoping that the government will keep in mind as we move forward with this legislation. You know, somebody once said to me, and I can't actually remember who it was, Mr. Speaker, that if harsher prison sentences, longer prison sentences, and the death penalty could end crime, then the US would have very little crime there. But we know that's not true, Mr. Speaker. Look, Mr. Speaker, we absolutely have to take a very, very close look at this legislation. But we have to take a look at it in a way that it will actually achieve our goal. Our goal is to protect our children. And I haven't had the time to go through this bill in detail, but what I have discovered with my colleagues across the way is that often the devil is in the details, and that's why we need experts to speak to the potential effectiveness of the proposed changes. Because, Mr. Speaker, I know my limitations. I am not a lawyer. And I'm not a lawyer, and so therefore I need to rely on the Justice Committee, our critic, who is a very experienced lawyer, as well as the experts that are going to be called forward to make sure that we make this legislation right. Because that is our goal, and that's where we should really be going with this. And Mr. Speaker, like other colleagues who've spoken in the House today, you know, we know that on the whole we're being told nationally the crime numbers are going down. And, you know, I have to stop here for a moment, Mr. Speaker. Every time that number, you know, people say that in Surrey, the people in Surrey don't believe it because of their lived experience day in and day out. And I've been at recent municipal debates where people were very offended when people even said that, because they do have a high level of anxiety around their own safety. But here, Mr. Speaker, what is really concerning is despite the changes made by the government since 2006 to better protect children, and there's a litany of them, about 9 of them, that despite all of that, it's the Minister of Justice who at committee stated that sexual offences against children had increased 6% over the past 2 years. That's a shocking number. That's a shocking number. And, you know, as a parent, I looked at this and I thought, how can that be? And that is despite the fact that since 2006, the tough on crime agenda has been at work or in place. And, Mr. Speaker, we all know, and I've worked as a councillor on a number of different issues, that along with being tough on crime, we also absolutely have to keep in mind the rights of the victim and protect the victims as well, and provide them the resources they need after the crime. And I don't know about other provinces, Mr. Speaker, but I have seen in my province, beautiful British Columbia, the child protection area not working too well. Not working too well. As a matter of fact, very, very disconcerting to hear the kind of cuts that have been made in the area of social workers and other preventative measures. So as well as having a tough on crime agenda, we also need support for the victims agenda and to help them to rehabilitate after the crime. Because the trauma, especially when it comes to sexual assault, is great. And 1 or 2 sessions with a counsellor is not going to cut it for every child. And so I am really, really looking for those resources that will actually help our young children to rehabilitate. I'm not saying that it's something a child could get over, or any person, Mr. Speaker. That would be very presumptuous of me to say that. But I can tell you that without systematic support and ongoing support, what we're going to do is leave the children even more vulnerable. So that really, really becomes critical that we have the resources there to support the children. At the same time, if we are going to be asking the police to be doing more monitoring and many other things, and absolutely that should, we should be taking a look at that. We need to make sure that there are resources there for the RCMP as well. And Mr. Speaker, going back to the children, I think sometimes even, not sometimes, every single time a child is sexually assaulted, what we have to do is look for support for the whole family. Because it's the whole family that goes through a trauma, the parents, the siblings, everybody else in the vicinity as well, including grandparents. So we do have to do much more in that area, but we also have to do much more to protect our communities from repeat offenders. And the tragic murder in my riding that occurred this year was a case of somebody who was a repeat offender. And yet, he was on probation, he was being monitored, and yet despite all of that, a young woman, prime of her life was taken away. So what we have to do is take a look at what actually works. And I'm not saying, Mr. Speaker, that we have the answers on this side of the House. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is we have to rely on experts and those who know far more than we do as parliamentarians about this whole issue and about how to tackle how we deal with those who offend. And, as you know, Mr. Speaker, you've been around, the NDP has put forward a valiant fight for the Circles of Support and Accountability program. And here is a quote from Steve Sullivan, former federal ombudsman for the victims of crime. The federal government recently announced it was cutting the measly $650,000 in funding that Corrections Canada offers. In addition, COSA receives funding from the National Crime Prevention Centre, which is also set to end this fall. All in all, the program costs $2.2 million a year. Like most community-based victim services, COSA is a fairly cheap program. It has 700 volunteers across the country who meet with offenders after their release to help them find jobs and places to live, or just to catch up over coffee. They support offenders as they settle into normal lives that do not involve new victims. They hold them accountable. Those services have been reduced or cut totally in some areas, Mr. Speaker. So let me finish by saying this, Mr. Speaker. We're supporting this bill to go to committee, and I'm pleading with my colleagues across the way to give us the time that is needed to do our due diligence at committee, and to be open to amendments, and to be open to expert advice, and to listen to those who know more about this than we do, so that we end up with good legislation. And then I'm pleading with them to fund their legislation so we can actually see its effect. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.